entitled Four Challenges to Governance in South Asia. Professor Riaz.
Thank you, Professor Mansur, for your kind introduction. I'm truly delighted to be at Dharwad University, and particularly when I'm invited by the Department of Government and Politics. I took a breath before I said government and politics, because the department that I teach at Delaware State University, which I had the honor of leading for 10 years, is called Politics and Government. Often in Dhaka, we tend to confuse these two names and think it's the same one. Professor Shamsun Ahmed has been very kind in inviting me, and I truly appreciate this opportunity to talk. I will try to limit my conversation within the topic that has been stipulated in this conference, and I have a few PowerPoint slides. I hope the technology will cooperate with me. And after two very interesting presentations, it is quite challenging to make this case that I'm trying to make. Uh, if we have to look at the challenges of governance in South Asia, we need to face it with our understanding of governance, what we need. Of course, you can take a very instrumentalist approach to it. And the instrumental approach is that considering the governance as an issue of proficient and impartial delivery of services, uh, and efficient implementation of programs. And of course, absence of all these things, this is the delivery part of it, tend to contribute to political instability, tend to contribute to the increasing violence, and of course, the emergence of extremist groups, declining citizens' trust in institutions. These are the things you can see from a very instrumentalist point of view if you think governance as such. And from this instrumentalist point of view, you also will come to the conclusion that the state of government in South Asia in general is very poor. However, if you want to look at the challenges as these conferences suggested us to look into, and a trajectory going forward in case of South Asia, and when I'm referring to South Asia, I mean Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Maldives, and Bhutan, of course. The cliche is here that there is no universal agreed definition of governance, right? Since 1980s, the word governance has come, and Vidya Chakraborty quite aptly has laid out the history of it. In the 1980s, particularly in the late 1980s, since then we have heard this buzzword, and the issue has dominated the discussion among the policymakers and the academics, and it has gone through various transformations too. I mean, the way it was introduced in 1989 has not stayed in that context. It has changed. It has transformed over time. And as it transforms, beyond this normative, beyond this instrumentalist part of it, there is a normative element, which, of course, there's people are referring to some of this political part of it. Definitely, there is a normative element. And over the years, what we have seen that even if you take a simple element to it, that there are two completely diverse and completely contradictory, divergently opposite position has emerged with respect to the governance concept. What are these two things? And I've taken as two definitions from 2013 that I put it up on the screen. The one that is the Kaufman and others, which is mostly used by the World Bank. World Bank's World Governance Indicator is based on that definition. And the other side is the process Fukuoka. What is the difference that I'm trying to reference? If you look at the Kaufman et al.'s definition, one of the things by process is governments are selected, monitored, and replaced, which presupposes a political process, which presupposes If we extrapolate it a little bit, it presupposes democracy, or at least participation, inclusivity. That's what we suppose. On the other hand, when Francis Fukuyama is suggesting that governance is what? Governance is government's ability to make and enforce rules, irrespective of the presence or absence of the democracy. These are the two completely contradictory positions. You can see that. And what we have seen since 1980s, this concept of, or the notion of, this governance has over time expanded itself. And in doing so, if you remember in the 1990s, it has been repeatedly told by the policymakers from the international arena, such as the World Bank and IMF, and beyond that, even within the academics, that the governance is too important to be left to the government alone. This is a very interesting position. Governance is too important to be left to the government alone. And in this case, what it does, this democratic nature, participation, delivering service by the state and other actors, irrespective of their nature, this is the swing that we have seen. Initially, at the very early stage, when this concept of governance started to come in, the fundamental element was the inclusivity part. But increasingly, we have seen the lessening of the state. The state seems to be pushed away. Previously, the word was government rather than governance. And as we looked into seeing the concept of governance, what we have seen is the pushing away of the government. And I'm not only meaning the government in the sense of the daily routine works, but state itself, because the state, what I described it as a withdrawing of state. State itself gradually retreated itself from social welfare, from the fundamental elements that a state should do. If you go back to the very concept of state, why do we have state? State provides us, it's a social contract, right? That actually we as a citizen are coming in agreement with the sovereign, and we are giving away some of our sovereign rights for what? Not only for security alone, because we are not in a state of the nature, right? We are not in a state of the situation that we live in a jungle, only security is the only thing that state is going to provide us something beyond that. That is for social welfare, whether it is education, health, and so on and so forth. Why state actually makes those roles instead of leaving it to the private corporation. But in this process of this governance, conceptual thing, the governance question, what happened is increasingly it was pushed away, or at least marginalized. The state's marginalization has created and replaced by what? Initially, in most cases, it is replaced by, or at least as a complementary to the state, was the argument, this is the market. It is the market which is going to decide. But also, they brought in the concept of civil society. So, the concept of the governance, the conceptualization of governance then became at least three elements. One is the civil society, one is the market, another is the government, or the state. It's not only government, it is the state we are talking about. We need to understand that one, because there's a huge difference in understanding. In considering the governance, we should not be equating this with the government itself. It is about the state, and state is a central element in our daily life. We don't born unless state tells us that we are born. I mean, I live in a country called the United States of America. Unless the birth certificate is issued, you are not born. Unless the death certificate is issued, you are not dead. That is the kind of influence state has in our daily life. So, when the state is pushed into one of the three, imagine that it is one of the three. One, absolutely, delighting thought is this. Oh, geez, civil society is there. Great, understandable. We will appreciate that. But at the expense of state. At the expense of state, that we cannot simply forget. And that is what this transformation of the conceptual element of the governance thing since late 1980 through the 1990s, and as we proceeded, it expanded. It expanded both horizontally and vertically. Yet, what is happened is this marginalization of state that we need to take into account. And in this conversation, in marginalization of state, among the academics and policymakers, unfortunately, and possibly deliberately, I cannot simply say unfortunately, perhaps in some way they deliberately, they excluded a key element of the state, capacity of state. What state can and cannot do, what state should not do. One is the normative element, another element is the capacity part of it. And that's why this conversation, when we're talking about the state, capacity of state, and anyone familiar with the political science, there's huge, debate with respect to the state capacity have always been what do we mean by state's capacity? What state does? In any conversation of the capacity of state, the question that I tend to ask, and I ask my students always ask, what state was supposed to do? If you take a Max Weberian notion that state is an institution which has the monopoly of violence, then what you see is this. Basically, there are three elements, three capacities that they insist on from a very Weberian notion. Is the first thing is the administrative capacity, which is largely the instrumentalist notion of quote-unquote governance / public administration. The second is the extractive capacity, what market would help the state to do. And the third element is the coercive capacity. Each state is the monopoly of violence, right? State becomes state when it becomes, which actually can insist on the monopoly of violence. So when the notion of the state capacity is discussed, most of the academics and policymakers, particularly academics, would insist on these three elements of the state capacity. And from that point of view, they are looking into the state, market, and civil society relationship. What I am arguing and what I insist that there is another element to it. Why do I argue that one? Because of the two things. One, I'm coming from the Max Weberian tradition. Despite the fact that I'm critical to the Max Weber's notion of this only institutionalized approach to understand state, because I think state is not only a combination of institutions, it is an institution of hegemony. State is state because it actually is a source of hegemony, ideological hegemony. And that is what is important. If it is an ideological hegemony, it has to have something that is beyond this institution. So even if I am taking a critical look at the Max Weber's notion, then I take another step and I take Habermasian point of view, and what I see is that a rule of action or choice is justified and only valid when people think that it is justified. What does that mean? It means, in my understanding, that there is another element of state's capacity is the capacity of legitimation. And I think that is central to the understanding of the capacity of state. That without this ability to be seen as a legitimate entity, its capacity cannot be simply a matter of coercion or administration or extraction. And that is where what we have seen that the state's capacity question has not been addressed in the governance discussion. That is what I'm trying to insist in this conversation. That we got to look into the capacity of state, but not in the typical sense of it. There is an element. And that is where we can actually enter into our conversation about South Asia. Why? Because in case of South Asia, and yes, I understand that I'm going to make a very overarching generalizations, yet please bear with me. I think that there are four major challenges. Because if we are looking into the way forward first, we need to look at the challenges. What are the challenges that we are currently facing in South Asia? right? The first one is the contesting sources of legitimacy of state. What do I mean by that? The first thing is, usually, in case of statehood, there are two sources which can actually question the legitimacy of state. One is the formal, one is the informal. Formal one is the institutional. Meaning, when you are establishing a nation state, when you are establishing a modern state, what do? You create an institution. Again, thanks to Weber, Max Weber. Thanks to any kind of discussion on the statehood, what do? We create this institution. For what? For extraction, for coercion and everything, right? So there are formal institutions which provide this legitimacy. But there are also informal parts. Mostly what is informal part is the traditional sources of legitimacy. Most of the modern states actually emerged in Europe and elsewhere. And since we have adopted, whether we are critical, even if we don't like it, since 19th century we have adopted the modern nation state concept from Europe. The European notion of modern nation state. And the way modern nation state emerged in Europe has not emerged in the same way in South Asia, except Nepal. And let me refer to Charles Tilly, whom you cannot avoid if you are talking about state, that violence actually creates states. All modern European states were built on violence, right? Through war. War makes state, state makes war. That is Charles Tilly's argument. Nepal is the only state in South Asia which has emerged out of this, war. Otherwise, not other South Asian states. Nevertheless, we have adopted, either it has been parachuted into South Asia thanks to colonialism, and it's not only in South Asia as well too. The modern nation state concept has been parachuted into those countries. So when we look into this modern nation state, as we know of it, what happens? Either traditional sources or the formal institutions. The traditional sources, in most cases in South Asia, has waned. We understand that. Since the establishment of colonial state and then post-colonial state, it has waned. It is not there. Demise of monarchy in case of Nepal, right? The monarchy is a very traditional source. For that matter, Bhutan is in transition. But we simply cannot ignore that it is still there in South Asia. In case of Pakistan, for example, or in case of Afghanistan, there are still traditional sources such as clan, elders, religious leaders, with deep tie to the society, has remained very, very important. Why in case of Afghanistan it is the Loya Jirga that has to be revived in terms of post-Taliban regime? Because it is still has importance. And similarly, there are other traditional ways or informal sources that constrain the nation state's institutional influence on daily lives. And that is what I'm suggesting that actually has an impact. How does it impact? In case of any modern nation state, and with respect to this informal and traditional sources on the one hand, of legitimacy and institutional and formal nation state type legitimacy, it depends on what kind of rule you have. If it is a personal one, and I try to put it in 4 different forms. Either it is a personalized rule through personalities and personal connections, even in when political parties exist, they are based on personalities, legitimacy becomes very low. Because that is, you can have a modern nation state. The edifice of the modern nation state is there. All the institution, it looks like a modern state. But if your legitimacy comes from this personalized rule, it is still tied to the informal traditional sources. Right? And that is what seems to me a major challenge for South Asia. That either it is personalized rule, minimally institutionalized state, or institutionalized non-competitive state, or institutionalized competitive state. I leave it to you. I leave it to you particularly those who are here from the political science department, when we are looking at a state, let us look at its legitimacy coming from where? Is it through the personalized route or is it through an institutional route? So if you look at, based on that, if you look at the legitimacy, state legitimacy question, one from peace, South Asian situation, if it's 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, except India, all of them are performing worse than global average. Or even if you look at the Asian experiences, what do you see? There is very painful. Why this legitimacy question is there? It is not only because states' geographical entity has been questioned, which has been. In case of Pakistan, we have seen that one. In case of India, Northeast India or the Kashmir question is there. In case of Bangladesh, Chittagong Hill Tracts is there. And then, not to mention Sri Lanka, where we have seen the 25 years plus civil war. All these things raise a question about the territorial integrity of the nation state. That's one element, but that's not what I'm suggesting when I'm talking about the state legitimacy. What I'm suggesting with respect to state legitimacy is whether the legitimacy of this system is driven from personalistic rule or it has been institutionalized. In case of South Asia, it has still remained a major challenge for South Asian state. One of these sources of contestation, not only this informal thing, and this, if you look at this formal and informal institution, one of them comes from growing proclivity towards religious identity. In case of Pakistan, Pakistan has never been able to resolve the question whether it is a Muslim nation, an Islamic state, or is it a Muslim state, an Islamic nation. It never could, right? But Pakistan is an exception to the extent that it has been struggling with this question for 70 plus years. However, it is provided a religion-specific space in case of Pakistan. But look at India, what is happening. The very notion of Hindutva that we have seen, that is growing influence, it raises serious question with respect to as whether the nation state's long-held ideals have seriously waned. And now, whether they are no longer the guiding principle of the state. It is India we are talking about. Quote unquote, the largest democracy we are talking about. The most formal institutions that a colonial state, a post-colonial state can inherit from the colonial structure. Pakistan was on the margin, Bangladesh was non-existent, right? India inherited the entire colonial structure. Yet, after 70 plus years, now what we are witnessing, whether those are the guiding principles or not. In case of the rising populist authoritarianism in case of India, we have already saw that one in case of Sri Lanka. The majoritarian argument of the Sinhala Buddhist ideology. That became the source of the Sri Lankan state's legitimacy. Or at least that's what. For 25 years, the Sinhala dominated who happens to be Buddhist. Yes, the Buddhists do engage in violence. There is a very common misnomer that Buddhists don't. And look at Myanmar, look at 25 years of conflict in Sri Lanka. But I'm not going there. But at least what the Sri Lankan state have tried and continue to try is finding its legitimacy in this Sinhala Buddhist majoritarian argument. The growing appeal of religion in Maldives. We have to talk about Maldives in the context of South Asia. But the growing